It was supposed to be a day of celebration. A visit to the zoo promised to be a joyful memory, a family outing to indulge in the endless curiosity of Gustavo, our son. It was his first time seeing the animals he had only known through stories and cartoons. He woke up early, overflowing with enthusiasm, eager to witness the majesty of a lion up close, hear a real roar, and observe the creatures that fascinated him so deeply. From the moment the morning began, he was bursting with questions, eager to learn every detail of what awaited him. For my wife, Monica, and me, it was also a unique experience. I never had the opportunity to visit a zoo as a child, so this trip meant a lot to us, a cherished memory we wanted to create together. We hoped to give Gustavo something he could look back on with warmth and happiness. But what was meant to be a day of pure joy turned into something unimaginable. In a split second, everything changed. An unthinkable accident placed Gustavo at the center of terrifying danger. He was pushed into the lion's enclosure, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. Fear gripped everyone around. The air grew heavy, and a suffocating tension filled the atmosphere. The crowd stood silent, their eyes fixed on the horrifying scene, as dread took hold of us completely. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, disbelief, and desperation. But along with these, we faced prejudice and judgment that turned our nightmare into an even harder battle. That day, it wasn't just Gustavo's safety at stake. Our family was subjected to discriminatory gazes, and every passing second became a fight for respect, protection, and dignity. That day started like any other family morning, but with an extra dose of excitement. We sat together for breakfast, and Gustavo, nearly exploding with joy, could hardly sit still. He had carefully packed his backpack, a water bottle, his favorite superhero figurine, and, of course, his beloved animal book that he loved flipping through, imagining those creatures in their real forms. Monica and I exchanged glances and chuckled quietly, though a subtle sense of concern lingered in the background. We knew what we were up against, the lingering looks that spoke volumes without uttering a word. Prejudice was a constant shadow, following us everywhere we went. But that day, my focus was elsewhere. I wanted Gustavo to have a unique experience, free from any interference that could dim his happiness and boundless curiosity. So, we packed everything we needed and set off, determined to make it a memorable day. During the car ride, Gustavo's excitement remained sky high. He chattered nonstop, listing the animals he wanted to see: tigers, elephants, zebras. But the crown jewel of his anticipation was always the lion. That was the ultimate symbol of his expectations, the animal he longed to encounter most. When we arrived at the zoo, we were greeted by a place teeming with families and tourists. The energy in the air was infectious. Everyone seemed as excited as we were. As we waited in line to buy tickets, something caught my attention. I noticed a staff member nearby, his name badge reading Douglas. He was staring at us intently, his expression loaded with distrust. The discomfort was immediate, but I chose to ignore it. I had faced this so many times before that brushing it off had become almost second nature. I refused to let malicious stares spoil what promised to be a precious memory for our son. Once we passed through the gates, Gustavo grabbed my hand tightly, eager to head straight to the lion's exhibit. I explained to him that there was no need to rush. We had the whole day to explore every corner of the zoo. We began our visit at the aviary, where the vibrant colors and lively movements of the birds captivated us. Gustavo was mesmerized, his eyes sparkling as he watched the birds flying freely around us. At one point, a blue parrot perched nearby, prompting him to laugh uncontrollably. Monica captured the scene in a photo, freezing that moment of pure happiness. After the aviary, we moved on to the reptile house, where Gustavo's fascination grew as he observed snakes and lizards slithering and crawling behind glass enclosures. With each discovery, his smile widened. Watching his reactions brought a deep sense of relief to me. All I wanted was for him to enjoy the day, to remember it as a light-hearted and joyful experience, free from any burden. But even amidst the joy, something gnawed at me. Douglas, the staff member we noticed earlier, kept reappearing. His unsettling gaze and stiff posture created an uncomfortable presence that was hard to ignore. It didn't feel like simple curiosity. It felt invasive, as though he was scrutinizing us for reasons beyond our understanding. I tried to shake it off and focus on Gustavo's delight and the experience we were building. But each new area of the zoo we visited seemed to bring Douglas closer, a persistent reminder that even moments of happiness could be clouded by judgment and unwelcome attention. As we explored more of the zoo, the day remained wonderful. Gustavo was enchanted by the animals. Monica was joyful beside him, and my heart swelled with pride seeing our son so radiant. I wanted that feeling to last, a truly unforgettable memory for him. However, as Gustavo immersed himself in every detail around him, I spotted Douglas lurking again, watching us from a distance. His fixed and almost intimidating stare was ever present, like a shadow that refused to fade. Trying to stay composed, I refocused on Gustavo, who was mesmerized by a massive python resting under a heat lamp. Monica squeezed my hand, and we shared a quiet moment of happiness, watching our son's wonderment. After a brief snack break, we finally made our way to the exhibit Gustavo had been waiting for, the lion enclosure. This was the highlight of the day for him. The towering glass walls allowed children to get incredibly close to the majestic predators. Gustavo pressed his hands against the glass, his wide eyes absorbing the sight of the lions lounging in the sun. In a magical moment, one of the lions lifted its head and stared directly at him. Gustavo froze, his expression a mix of awe and genuine courage. My heart swelled with pride at his bravery. But then, scanning the area, I saw Douglas once more. He was close enough for me to notice his hostile expression, a mix of disdain and something I couldn't quite identify. A chill ran down my spine. It felt as if our joy was somehow intolerable to him, as if our presence alone was an affront. A wave of silent fury surged within me, the bitter indignation of being judged without cause. Yet I held back the anger, reminding myself that this day was for Gustavo, and nothing would dull its brightness. Monica, sensing my unease, touched my arm gently and signaled with a subtle nod that we should keep moving. We wrapped up our visit with a picnic, where we tried to relax despite the lingering discomfort. Gustavo's laughter echoed as he played and marveled at every new discovery. He was thrilled by the playful antics of the monkeys and later mesmerized by the vibrant fish in the aquarium. His happiness was infectious, a balm for the tension I couldn't completely ignore. As we approached the zoo's exit, Douglas appeared again, standing near the gate with crossed arms and a defiant look. His expression seemed to communicate that we didn't belong. Though his presence unnerved me deeply, I resolved not to let it overshadow Gustavo's joy. Just as we neared the exit, the day took an unimaginable turn. Douglas appeared once more, but this time, his actions crossed every conceivable boundary. Without warning, he pushed Gustavo toward the lion's enclosure. It all happened so quickly that the world seemed to slow down as I watched my son stumble, his small body leaning dangerously over the edge of the barrier. Time froze. Gustavo's terrified scream pierced the air as he fell into the enclosure. In that instant, the world around me collapsed into a whirlwind of panic and despair. The crowd erupted in shouts, the reality of the situation sinking in. My eyes were locked on my son, lying motionless on the ground, while the nearest lion turned its powerful gaze toward him. The scene was every parent's worst nightmare come to life. Gustavo, so small and vulnerable, was at the mercy of a predator unlike anything he had ever imagined. Monica's desperate cry joined the cacophony around us as she tried to climb the railing, her instincts driving her to reach our son. I held her back, knowing I needed to protect her as well, though every fiber of my being wanted to leap into the enclosure myself. Fear consumed me, but so did rage. Douglas had caused this horrific situation. His cruel intentions now endangered my child's life. The crowd stood frozen, paralyzed by the terror unfolding before them. Gustavo began to stir, his small arms trembling as he tried to push himself up. His confusion was evident as his wide eyes scanned the area and locked onto the approaching lion. The lion's imposing figure moved closer, its golden mane glinting in the sunlight. Every calculated step it took was a reminder of its immense power and the imminent danger Gustavo faced. The lion stood only a few meters away from Gustavo, its amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that froze everyone in place. Gustavo's small chest heaved as he fought to steady his breathing. The fear on his face was palpable, yet he remained eerily still, following the instinct not to provoke the powerful predator. I clung to the barrier, my knuckles white, shouting, "Gustavo, don't move." My voice trembled with desperation, knowing that any sudden action could incite the lion. Monica clutched my arm, tears streaming down her face as she softly murmured Gustavo's name, as if her voice alone could protect him. The lion moved closer, its muscles rippling under its golden coat as it walked with a slow, deliberate grace. Its paws pressed against the ground silently, the weight of its presence felt by all watching. Gustavo, small and vulnerable, remained frozen, his wide eyes locked on the predator before him. Around us, zookeepers scrambled, shouting into their radios for backup and devising plans to intervene. But none of that mattered to me. The world outside the enclosure had disappeared, and all that existed was a terrifying standoff between my son and the lion. Gustavo's tiny figure seemed to shrink further as the lion stopped just a meter away. And then, something remarkable happened. Instead of a predatory lunge, the lion lowered its massive head, almost as if it were examining Gustavo with curiosity rather than aggression. The lion, now mere inches from Gustavo, moved its head closer, its powerful presence enveloping the boy in a moment of intense stillness. Gustavo, trembling but unmoving, kept his gaze fixed on the animal. It was as if, in this shared moment, a silent understanding passed between them, an unspoken truce that defied the laws of nature. To everyone's astonishment, the lion's fierce intensity softened. Slowly, it extended its massive head toward Gustavo, its amber eyes filled with something that could only be described as curiosity. Gustavo, gathering every ounce of courage he had, hesitantly raised his small hand, stretching it toward the lion. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the two came within touching distance. Then, in a move no one could have predicted, the lion gently nudged Gustavo's hand with its nose. Its rough tongue brushed against his fingers in what appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement, even affection. A collective sigh of relief swept through the onlookers, the tension momentarily broken by what could only be described as a miracle. Tears streamed down Monica's face as she clung to me, her body trembling with a mix of fear and gratitude. I stood frozen, my heart pounding as I witnessed my son exhibit a bravery beyond his years. Gustavo, still in shock but visibly calmer, managed a small, shaky smile. The lion, having completed its inspection, slowly backed away. It returned to the shadow of a nearby rock, settling down as if the encounter had satisfied its curiosity. Gustavo, still kneeling on the ground, let out a shaky breath, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. As the lion retreated to the shade, the zookeeper seized the opportunity to act. A team entered the enclosure with cautious urgency, their movements deliberate and their voices soothing as they approached Gustavo. The boy remained still, his small frame trembling, yet his eyes followed the lion as if mesmerized by what had just occurred. The lead zookeeper reached Gustavo and gently scooped him into his arms. The moment they lifted him from the ground, a wave of relief washed over the crowd, breaking the silence with applause and cheers. Monica and I rushed to the barrier, our arms outstretched as they brought Gustavo back to safety. As soon as he was within reach, we enveloped him in a tight embrace, our tears mingling with words of love and relief. "You're safe now," I whispered, holding him as if letting go would somehow undo the miracle we had just witnessed. Monica kissed his forehead repeatedly, her sobs a mixture of joy and anguish. Gustavo, his voice barely audible, murmured, "I wasn't scared, Papa." The lion knew I was brave. His words, spoken with innocent sincerity, struck a deep chord within me. Despite everything, my son had faced his fear with a courage I could hardly comprehend. The crowd around us began to disperse, but whispers of the incredible encounter continued to ripple through the zoo. As we prepared to leave, I couldn't ignore the presence of Douglas in the distance. His expression was a blend of frustration and disbelief, as though he couldn't reconcile the miracle that had unfolded. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I knew there would be time to address his actions. For now, my focus was on Gustavo's safety. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief that Gustavo was safe, anger at the recklessness that put him in danger, and a growing determination to hold Douglas and the zoo accountable. The first step was contacting a lawyer. Harold Green, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for taking on difficult cases, listened intently as we recounted every detail of that harrowing day. His calm demeanor and pointed questions gave us confidence that we had found the right person to lead our fight. "This isn't just about Gustavo," Harold said firmly. "This is about ensuring that no other family has to endure what you did. You have a strong case, and we'll make sure they answer for their negligence." Harold wasted no time. He filed formal complaints against both Douglas and the zoo, citing gross negligence and endangerment. Meanwhile, the zoo's management contacted us, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident. Reluctantly, Monica and I agreed, knowing that our priority was to ensure real changes were made to prevent future tragedies. At the meeting, the zoo's director, a somber woman with a clear sense of the gravity of the situation, listened as we detailed the events. Her face grew pale as we described how Douglas had pushed our son into the enclosure. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Douglas has been suspended pending a full investigation, and we are prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to ensure this never happens again." Though her words were reassuring, we knew promises alone were not enough. "This isn't just about suspension," I said firmly. "It's about accountability. Douglas's actions nearly cost my son his life, and your institution allowed someone like him to work in a position of trust." The director nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. We owe your family much more than an apology. We will cooperate fully with the investigation and implement immediate reforms to address our hiring practices and staff oversight. As news of the incident spread, the public response was swift and overwhelming. Media outlets covered the story extensively, detailing the near-tragic events and the miraculous connection between Gustavo and the lion. Letters of support, messages of solidarity, and offers of assistance began pouring in from people across the country. Many expressed outrage at Douglas's actions and the zoo's apparent failure to address prior complaints about his behavior. Harold uncovered troubling details during his investigation. Douglas had a history of complaints against him, including reports of hostile behavior toward visitors, especially families. These complaints had been ignored by zoo management, which now faced mounting public and legal scrutiny. The zoo issued a formal apology, acknowledging their failures and promising immediate changes. They pledged to conduct a thorough review of their hiring processes and implement stricter monitoring of employee conduct. Despite these assurances, we knew our fight wasn't over. Justice for Gustavo required more than policy changes. It required holding Douglas personally accountable. Meanwhile, our family became a symbol of resilience and determination. Parents across the city rallied around us, sharing stories of their own encounters with unsafe environments and calling for greater accountability in public spaces. Local advocacy groups reached out, offering their support to amplify our cause. Monica suggested organizing a community meeting to channel this collective energy into action. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about making sure every family feels safe." Together with Harold and several advocacy organizations, we planned an event to raise awareness about safety, discrimination, and the responsibilities of public institutions. The legal proceedings against Douglas and the zoo reached a boiling point as the court date approached. Harold meticulously prepared our case, compiling testimonies from witnesses, records of prior complaints against Douglas, and security footage that captured the shocking moment he pushed Gustavo into the enclosure. When the day of the trial arrived, the courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and supporters who had followed our story. Monica and I sat side by side, holding hands tightly, determined to see this through for Gustavo and for all the families who deserved safer spaces. The prosecution presented a damning case against Douglas, emphasizing his history of misconduct and the zoo's failure to address the red flags. Witnesses recounted unsettling encounters with him, painting a picture of a man unfit for his role. When the security footage was played, the courtroom fell silent. The images of Douglas's deliberate push and Gustavo's harrowing fall into the lion's enclosure left an indelible mark on everyone present. When it was my turn to testify, I stood with a mix of resolve and emotion. My son was exposed to unimaginable danger because of one man's actions and an institution's negligence. I began. No parent should have to witness what I did that day, and no child should face the terror that Gustavo endured. Douglas's defense tried to argue that the incident was accidental, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge, visibly moved, condemned his actions as reckless and inexcusable. The jury deliberated for only a short time before reaching a verdict. Douglas was found guilty of endangerment and banned from working in any capacity involving public or family-facing roles. The court also mandated the zoo to implement sweeping reforms to ensure such negligence would never happen again. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of relief and approval as the verdict was read. For Monica and me, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but the trauma of that day still lingered in our hearts and in Gustavo's memories. We left the courthouse with a sense of closure, but also a renewed commitment to ensure no other family would endure what we had. In the days following the trial, the zoo reached out to formally apologize once more. They invited us to a public event where they pledged to implement reforms, including stricter employee screening and training, as well as enhanced safety protocols for visitors. While it was reassuring to see these changes, we knew this was just the beginning of a larger journey. The support from the community continued to pour in. Parents shared their own stories of unsafe experiences in public spaces, and advocacy groups joined forces to promote safety and accountability. Monica and I were invited to speak at schools and community centers, where we shared our story to raise awareness about the importance of vigilance and the power of standing up for justice. For Gustavo, the road to recovery was a gradual one. He began attending sessions with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma, helping him process his fears and rebuild his confidence. Over time, his nightmares became less frequent, and his bright, curious spirit began to shine again. One evening, as we sat together looking through photos from that fateful day, Gustavo pointed to the lion in one of the pictures. "Do you think he remembers me, Papa?" he asked softly. I smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I think he does, son, and I think he'll always remember how brave you were." Life slowly began to return to normal in the weeks after the trial. With the legal battle behind us, Monica and I focused on creating a sense of peace and security for Gustavo. Our days were filled with small, meaningful moments: family dinners, trips to the park, and quiet evenings reading together. Each of these moments felt like a gift, a reminder of the strength we had found as a family. Gustavo's resilience was nothing short of inspiring. He gradually opened up about his feelings, speaking about the lion with a mix of awe and understanding. "I think he knew I wasn't going to hurt him," Gustavo said one night. "That's why he didn't hurt me." His words carried a wisdom far beyond his years, a testament to the courage and insight he had gained through such an extraordinary experience. One day, we received an invitation from the zoo. They wanted Gustavo to return as an honored guest to see the changes they had implemented and meet the team dedicated to ensuring safety and inclusion for all visitors. After much deliberation, we decided to accept. It was a chance for Gustavo to reclaim the joy of that day, free from the shadow of fear. When we arrived at the zoo, Gustavo held our hands tightly, but his excitement grew with each familiar sight. As we approached the lion enclosure, he paused, gazing at the magnificent animal that had once stood inches away from him. The lion, now lying peacefully in the shade, seemed to radiate a calm energy. Gustavo stepped closer and in a soft voice said, "Thank you." In that moment, it felt as though Gustavo had closed a chapter, reclaiming his strength and courage. Monica and I stood behind him, our hearts full of pride and gratitude. As we left the zoo that day, a sense of hope and renewal filled the air. Gustavo's bravery had not only saved his life, but it also sparked a movement that would protect countless others. Our family had faced unimaginable challenges, but together, we had emerged stronger, with a renewed appreciation for the power of love, resilience, and community. "Thank you for joining us on this journey," I said as we reflected on everything that had unfolded. "Let's continue to fight for a world where every child feels safe and every family is treated with dignity." If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Activate notifications so you never miss an update, and share where you're watching from. We love hearing from every corner of the world.